So we will now go over the abstract together. So how is it organized? As you can see, the first sentences will show you the background. I'm pretty sure you figured that out. And then there comes, after the background, the question and the hypothesis. In this case, in a search for underlying molecular mechanism, we hypothesized that this perpetuation of fibrogenesis is caused by epigenetic modifications. Now it's a little bit different from the abstract that was shown before. Now we find already the answer. We demonstrate here that hypermethylation of RAS1, encoding an inhibitor of the RAS oncoprotein, is associated with the perpetuation of fibroblast activation and fibrogenesis in the kidney. This is the answer. Then they go on and explain us the results for their answer. RAS1 hypermethylation is mediated by the methyltransferase DNMT1 in renal fibrogenesis, and so on. And in the end, they end with an implication. So, these studies demonstrate that epigenetic modifications may provide a molecular basis for perpetuated fibroblast activation and fibrogenesis in the kidney. So here we see the key terms. So fibrogenesis, fibrotic, fibroblast. So pretty sure this is coming almost in every sentence. This is a key term. So we know that this abstract, that the whole paper goes about fibrogenesis. Another key term is epigenetics, hypermethylation, epigenetics. So we know that epigenetics, and in this case hypermethylation, is very important. Now the signaling words. So in search for, that means that there is something unknown. We hypothesize, so here is the hypothesis or the question. We demonstrate here, so that means that here is the answer. And these studies demonstrate is an answer and may provide is an implication. An interesting thing here in this abstract is that you can find almost the same kind of sentence 3 times. If you look at in the question here, it says we hypothesize that this perpetuation of fibrogenesis is caused perpetuation of fibrogenesis here. Then you will find almost the same sentence again in the answer, perpetuation of fibroblast activation and fibrogenesis here, and also in the implication, may provide a molecular basis for perpetuated fibroblast activation and fibrogenesis. So you see that repeating important issues is very important in an abstract. So you repeat it here 3 times, almost the same sentence in such a short abstract. So repeating is a good thing in science. Okay, now we will go into the text parts of a paper. We will start off with the introduction. This part is organized in a way that I first will give you the function of an introduction, then the content, the organization, the writing, and the length. We will start off with the function. So, what is the function of an introduction? Of course, you should awake the reader's interest. He should think, wow, this is cool, I want to read about it. Second, it should be informative enough to prepare the reader. So everything that is important for someone to understand what you did should be introduced in the introduction. How can you awake the interest of the reader? Well, you should be direct and to the point and very short. Very often when you read very long introductions, you will figure out that you are not concentrated anymore, that you miss the point what has been said. So try to be as short as possible, as direct and to the point. But it should be clear and informative, nevertheless, and it should be in a readable style. The first step of a storyline is in the introduction, the question. the question is the most important thing in a paper. So you should introduce the question in the introduction. So, what is your hypothesis? If you write your introduction, you will figure out that you will start off with the known. You have to tell a lot about the known. Then there will be something unknown, otherwise you wouldn't have to do any research on it. This is very often only one sentence, one or two sentences, and the unknown will lead you to the question. The question is the most important part of the whole introduction, and then you can go on to tell the reader how you will answer the question by the experimental approach, but you don't have to put in the experimental approach in the introduction. If you have a clear question, the methods, the results and the discussion will be easy to write, because in the methods you will tell the reader the experiments to answer the question. In the result part, you will actually show the results that answer the question, and in the discussion you state and answer the question and explain how it will fit into the knowledge. So, in the introduction, you write first about what is known, then about what is unknown, and what is the question. So, what was the question of the study? That's the most important one, the question. The question is stated as a question or a hypothesis in the introduction. Then the unknown, where did the question came from, what is believed about the topic, and what is known. And it should be also clear why is the author asking the question, what is still unknown or problematic. Okay, in the introduction, you actually have to put a lot of references, because every statement about the known you have to have a reference for. Nevertheless, you should keep your references to a minimum. How can you do that? You can decide. You should put the references that, for example, show the fact first, maybe the reference that showed it most elegant, maybe the most important reference on this topic, or the most recent one. But it's also possible to refer to a review, which actually reviews the topic in detail. Paper should be new, true, important, and comprehensible. That a paper is new, you will state in the introduction, because you state that something is unknown. Of course, when you find an answer to the unknown, it will be new. Important? Well, important you have to indicate in the introduction as well. Indicate that it's important. Put it in a broader range. Say what it is important about. You have to organize your introduction. Most of the time, the organization is structured in a funnel shape. So you write a lot of sentences about the known. Very often you have only one or two sentences about the unknown, which lead to the question, which is one sentence. And sometimes you then tell the reader how this question is answered by the experimental approach. So the known, as I said, are many sentences, is about the general topic of the paper, and it should be narrowed by appropriate scientific logic to the unknown. The unknown normally is only one sentence or a few sentences. It indicates that the work is new. It links the known to the question, and it's virtually almost the same as the question. The unknown determines the question. The question is the specific topic of the paper. It's the most important part of the paper, and it is the end of the funnel. Sometimes you can go on by explaining how you will answer your question by putting the experimental approach. Now we will see how you will write the introduction. Well, the unknown, you should state the unknown by saying something like has not been determined, has not been established, is unclear, is unknown. An example here is from a Nature Medicine paper where you can see what perpetuates scarring in the setting of fibrosis is not yet known. So here is the unknown stated. Or you can imply the unknown by stated suggestion or possibility. Also here is an example where you say, thus an intervention that maintains endogenous insulin production might improve the management of type 1 diabetes and reduce long-term complications. That means that this is not known, but, well, you think it might improve. So it's a suggestion or a possibility. The question should be stated very precise, as a hypothesis or as a question. You should name the variables that were studied, and you should use precise verb in the present tense. So here is a nice example where they say, here we hypothesize that epigenetic modifications are a molecular cause for fibrotic fibroblast activation and fibrosis. We hypothesized here. The question should inevitably come from the topic of the known. The question has to be expected from the unknown, and the key terms in the question should have appeared earlier in the introduction. Sometimes you have two questions. If you have two questions, both questions must follow inevitably from the previous statements. Sometimes the second question depends on the answer of the first one. Then you have to link the questions by if so or a similar phrase. Also here we have an example where there is a question, however it remains unclear whether induced pluripotent stem cells can be generated directly from elderly patients with chronic diseases. So this is the first question stated in the unknown, and then it goes on, and whether such patient-specific iPS cells could be differentiated into the particular cell type that would be needed to treat or study the patient's conditions, and whether such patient-specific iPS cells, so if it's possible, the first question, if it's possible to generate the iPS cells, can you then differentiate them? So these questions are linked together. Sometimes the question is also stated in the unknown. Then it's unnecessary to state the question again. But you should identify the previous statement as question by using transition phrases, like to answer this question or to test this hypothesis. If you write an experimental approach, it should be very brief. Only one sentence and most 2 or 3 sentences. It should describe one of the variables, the independent or dependent, in addition to naming the animal or the patient population. How can you signal your question and your experimental approach? Very often, as seen before, it is done in one sentence. For example, here, to test the hypothesis that ... we did something in one sentence. Or you can use 2 sentences. For example, here we hypothesize that, then the hypothesis is coming, and then in the next sentence, to test this hypothesis, we did something. So here's an example where you can see that the question is linked to the experimental design by saying we aim to determine whether, and then the question or the hypothesis is coming, and then the next sentence will tell you how the experimental approach is by to this end we did something. You should put the animal or human population into the question if, for example, the question is about a particular animal, or if you studied a specific human population. If the animal is, for example, only a model to identify a mechanism that is of greater interest, then the animal should only be part of the experimental approach and not be part of the question. For example, here we can find a work where they aimed to determine whether the Nesfatin-1 participates in central control of puberty. So this is a general question, and they used actually female rats to investigate that. Of course, whatever finding will come out there, they hope that this will also apply for maybe humans. So the female rats only appear in the experimental approach. To this end, expression analysis and functional tests were conducted in female rats. So how long should be the introduction? It should be as short as possible, but nevertheless, it should be clear and informative. A typical journal article is one double-spaced page, about 250 to 300 words. If you have a long introduction, it can be two double-spaced pages, around 500 to 600 words. What you should be avoiding is to review the topic. So a very long introduction does not make sense. You should really make it as brief as possible, because an introduction is not a review. So also here we will find an exercise. Please print out the abstracts on the slide and follow the instructions. So state the known. So where do you find the known? Maybe put the known in 3 short sentences. Find the unknown. So what is unknown about the topic? Find the question. The question is the most important part of the introduction. Is it actually stated as a question? Is it implied? Is it a hypothesis? So why do you think is a paper important? Is there an experimental design mentioned in the introduction? Do you find the experimental material? Is it on animals, on humans? Are results mentioned in the introduction? Sometimes you can find that. Do you think that this is a good idea? Or do you think it's bad? What are the key terms? What is the introduction about? Are there transition words? So are the sentences linked together?